The morning sun cast long shadows across the broken buildings of New Seoul Colony. Nari Kim pressed her small body against the cold concrete wall and listened carefully. Her plasma rifle felt heavy in her 12-year-old hands, but she had carried it for 3 years now. The weight no longer bothered her. Two guards at the main entrance, whispered Hyun Lee from his position on the rooftop above. His voice came through the tiny radio in her ear. At 14, Hyun was like a big brother to all the younger fighters. One patrol walking around the back. They look sleepy. Nari smiled. The Vorthak never expected human children to be dangerous. They thought all young humans were weak and helpless like the children of other planets they had conquered. This mistake had cost them many battles over the past 5 years. "Copy that," she whispered back. "Tae, are you ready? Ready when you are, little sister," came the voice of their commander. Tae Park was only 16, but he led their group with the skill of an adult general. The older humans who had survived the initial invasion often asked him for advice. Nari took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the wall. She walked slowly toward the Vorthak guard post with her hands raised high. Her rifle was hidden under a torn blanket she carried on her back. To the aliens, she looked like another hungry, refugee child looking for food. The two Vorthak guards were tall and covered in gray scales. They carried energy weapons that could cut through steel. Their red eyes watched her approach, but they did not raise their guns. Children were not threats in their minds. "Another human spawn," said the first guard in their clicking language. Nari had learned to understand their speech during the long years of war. "They breed like insects." "Let it pass," said the second guard. "Command says we need more workers for the mines anyway." Nari kept walking until she was directly between them. Then she dropped the blanket and brought up her rifle in one smooth motion. The Vorthak guards had exactly 1 second to realize their mistake before her plasma bolts ended their lives. "Guards down," she said into her radio, moving to the main building. The command post was a low structure built from Vorthak metal. It had been a human school before the invasion. Nari remembered playing in the courtyard when she was very small, before her parents died in the bombardment. Now it served as a coordination center for enemy operations in this sector. She found the ventilation shaft exactly where their spy had said it would be. The opening was barely large enough for her small frame to squeeze through. An adult human could never fit. This was why the resistance used children for these missions. The metal ductwork was dark and cramped. Nari crawled forward on her elbows, pulling her explosive charges behind her. Each device was no larger than her fist, but contained enough power to bring down half the building. Hyun had taught her how to make them from captured Vorthak power cells. Through the ventilation grates, she could see Vorthak officers standing around holographic displays. They were planning something big. She caught words like final offensive and human nest. Her heart beat faster, but her hands stayed steady as she placed the first charge. "Target acquired," she whispered. "Beginning placement." It took her 20 minutes to position all 6 devices throughout the building. The hardest part was staying quiet while the aliens talked below her. If even one of them looked up at the wrong moment, the mission would fail. She was crawling toward the exit shaft when alarms began to sound. Not her alarms, she realized with growing fear. These were perimeter warnings. "Nari, get out of there now," came Hyun's urgent voice. "They found our observation post. I am compromised." Through a ventilation grate, she saw Vorthak soldiers dragging her friend into the main room. Hyun's face was bloody, but his eyes were still defiant. The alien commander, a large Vorthak with silver scales, stood over him. "So the human insects do use their young for war," the commander said. His voice was like grinding stone. "How primitive. How desperate." "You would not understand," Hyun replied in perfect Vorthak. His language skills had always impressed the other children. "Humans, protect what matters most." The commander laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What could matter to a species that sends children to die? We will break your mind, young human. You will tell us where the others hide." Nari watched in horror as they attached neural torture devices to Hyun's head. These machines could drive adult minds insane in minutes. But Hyun had been trained for this possibility. All the child soldiers had. She activated the first explosive charge. The blast shook the entire building. Emergency lighting flickered on as sections of the roof collapsed. In the confusion, Nari dropped through a broken grate directly into the main room. The Vorthak soldiers spun toward her, weapons raised, but she was already moving, rolling behind an overturned table as energy bolts scorched the air above her head. Her small size made her a difficult target in the smoke and debris. "The charges are armed," she shouted to Hyun in their own language. 30 seconds. Hyun understood immediately. Despite the torture device on his head, he threw himself backward, smashing his chair against the wall. The impact freed his hands just enough to reach the emergency beacon on his belt. Nari fired her rifle at the main power coupling, plunging half the room into darkness. In the chaos that followed, she grabbed Hyun and pulled him toward the hole she had blown in the wall. They ran through the rubble as the remaining charges exploded behind them. The Vorthak command post collapsed in a shower of metal and flame. 20 enemy officers died in the blast, including the silver-scaled commander, who had thought human children were weak. Mission accomplished. Tae's voice crackled through their radios. All units fall back to rally point 7. As they stumbled through the ruins toward safety, Hyun looked at his young friend with amazement. "You came back for me." "Of course," Nari said simply. "We are family now." Behind them, the burning command post sent a column of smoke into the morning sky. Across the colony, other resistance cells would see the signal and know that once again, the humans had struck back. The Vorthak would send more troops, build stronger defenses, and try harder to understand how a species they considered primitive continued to outfight them. But they would never truly understand. They could not comprehend how human children, faced with the destruction of everything they loved, had become something the galaxy had never seen before. Not just soldiers, but innovators who turned their small size and underestimated minds into weapons that could bring down empires. The war was far from over, but on this morning in the ruins of New Sol Colony, 12-year-old Nari Kim had proven once again that humanity would never surrender. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, they would continue to fight and they would win. 3 years had passed since the destruction of the New Sol command post. Nari Kim was 15 now, taller but still small for her age. Her hands moved with practiced ease as she adjusted the targeting system on a captured Vorthak heavy cannon. The weapon was twice her size, but she understood its workings better than its original makers. "Contact bearing 270, called out Jin from the observation tower. The 17-year-old had lost his left eye in a bombing raid, but could still spot enemy movement from kilometers away. "Looks like a full assault wing." Nari smiled grimly. The Vorthak had been trying to retake this sector for 6 months. Every attack failed because they still could not understand how human children fought. They expected traditional military formations and predictable tactics. Instead, they faced opponents who had learned warfare through necessity and innovation. "All units, this is Ghost Leader," she spoke into her comm device. At 15, Nari commanded 12 resistance cells across 3 cities. Other species would never give such authority to someone so young. But humans had learned that age meant nothing compared to results. Execute Thunder Protocol. Across the battlefield, hidden positions came alive. Children who looked no older than 10 operated heavy weapons with deadly precision. Teenagers coordinated artillery strikes using mathematics they had learned by trial and error. The youngest fighters, some barely 8 years old, served as scouts and saboteurs in places no adult could reach. The Vorthak assault force met a wall of perfectly coordinated fire. Their superior numbers and advanced technology meant nothing against opponents who treated every building as a fortress and every street as a killing field. Within an hour, the enemy retreat began. "Sir, incoming transmission from orbit," reported Kwan, their communications specialist. At 13, she could hack Vorthak encryption faster than their own computer systems. "It is from Earth Defense Fleet. They say Admiral Jin Sato wants to speak with our commander." Nari frowned. Earth Defense Fleet had been destroyed in the first year of the invasion. Everyone knew that. "Put him through." The hologram that appeared showed a middle-aged Korean man in a blue uniform she did not recognize. His face was weathered, but his eyes held the same determination she saw in veteran fighters. "This is Admiral Jin Sato of the reformed Earth Defense Fleet," he said. "We have been monitoring your operations. Your tactical skills are remarkable. We would like to coordinate our efforts." "Reformed Fleet?" Nari asked. "The EDF was wiped out 8 years ago. The original fleet, yes. But Earth never stopped building ships. We have been preparing for this day. The time has come to drive the Vorthak from human space permanently. 2 days later, Nari stood on the bridge of the EDF flagship Resilience. She had never seen anything so large. The ship stretched for kilometers and carried enough firepower to level continents. But what impressed her most were the crew members. They were all adults, clean and well-fed and educated in ways she could barely imagine. "Remarkable," said Dr. Mira Choi, the ship's chief scientist. She was studying brain scans of the child soldiers with obvious fascination. "Your neural development is completely unprecedented. The stress of combat has actually enhanced your cognitive abilities." Nari did not understand all the scientific terms, but she got the basic idea. "You mean the war made us smarter?" "In ways that should be impossible, yes. Your problem-solving abilities exceed those of trained adult strategists. Your spatial reasoning is off the charts. Most fascinating of all, you show no signs of the psychological trauma that would cripple other species." Captain Wu, Nari's former mentor who had survived the early battles, nodded grimly. "We had to adapt or die. The children learned fastest because they had no choice." Admiral Sato called them to the command center where a holographic display showed the entire solar system. Red markers indicated Vorthak positions while blue showed human forces. The enemy still controlled most of the major colonies, but their positions looked less secure than before. "Intelligence reports indicate the Vorthak are planning one final offensive," Sato explained. "They want to crush all human resistance before reinforcements can arrive from their home worlds. They have committed their entire occupation fleet to this operation." "How many ships?" asked Tay, who had joined them on the flagship. At 19, he was now the youngest general in human history. 800 capital ships, 2,000 escort vessels, ground forces numbering in the millions. Sato paused to let the numbers sink in. "They outnumber us 5-1. The adult officers looked worried, but Nari felt only excitement. Big numbers meant nothing if the enemy made predictable moves. "What is their target?" "Earth. They plan to end this war by destroying humanity's homeworld." For the first time since boarding the ship, Nari felt real fear. Earth was where the few remaining civilian populations lived. Children who had never learned to fight. Elderly people who remembered peace. If the planet fell, humanity would be reduced to scattered resistance cells with no hope of rebuilding. "We have to stop them," she said simply. "Agreed. But conventional tactics will not work against such overwhelming force. We need something unexpected. Something they cannot plan for." Nari exchanged glances with Tay and Captain Wu. They were all thinking the same thing. "You need us." "The child soldiers, yes. Your unconventional approaches might give us the edge we need." Over the next week, Nari worked with the fleet commanders to plan humanity's desperate gambit. The adult officers were skilled and experienced, but they thought in traditional patterns. They wanted to meet the enemy in open space combat, ship against ship. The child soldiers had a different idea. "We do not fight their strength," Nari explained to the assembled command staff. "We use their size against them. Big fleets move slowly, they have to coordinate with each other, that makes them predictable." "What do you propose?" asked Admiral Sato. "We let them come to us, but not in space. We draw them into the asteroid belt where their big ships become targets instead of weapons." The plan was risky beyond anything attempted before. It required splitting the human fleet into dozens of small groups, each operating independently. Adult commanders hated the lack of central control, but the child soldiers had never fought any other way. When the Vorthak fleet finally arrived, they found what they expected to find: a smaller human force trying to defend Earth through conventional deployment. The alien commanders were confident as they began their approach. They never suspected that hundreds of small human ships were already hidden among the asteroids, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Led by child commanders who had learned to see patterns in chaos, the human fleet struck from every direction at once. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Vorthak occupation fleet was scattered debris floating among the rocks. Human losses were minimal. Earth was safe. Standing on the bridge of the damaged but victorious Resilience, Nari watched the last enemy ships flee toward deep space. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as celebration erupted around her, she felt strangely empty. For 8 years, fighting had been her entire world. Now what would she do? What did peace look like for someone who had never known it? Admiral Sato approached her with a data pad in his hands. The Galactic Council has acknowledged our victory. As compensation for the occupation, they are offering full membership and access to their educational systems. Educational systems? Schools, Nari. Universities. The chance to learn things beyond warfare. She looked at the data pad with its incomprehensible symbols and equations. After years of learning by doing, the idea of sitting in classrooms seemed strange and frightening. But maybe it was time for a new kind of battle, one fought with minds instead of weapons. When do we start? She asked. 6 months after the victory celebration, Nari Kim sat in a quiet room staring at a page full of symbols she could not understand. The Galactic Academy entrance exam lay before her like an enemy she could not defeat with weapons or tactics. Each question might as well have been written in an alien language. Question 17, she read aloud. Analyze the metaphorical significance of the burning tree in classical Altarian poetry. She put down her stylus and rubbed her temples. What was a metaphor? What was Altarian poetry? These concepts felt as foreign as Vorthak battle cries. Soft knock interrupted her frustration. Yun Li entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea. Her old friend had changed in the month since the war ended. He was taller now, his face fuller from regular meals, but his eyes still held the alertness of a soldier. Still struggling with the test prep? He asked, settling into the chair across from her. I can calculate the trajectory of a plasma bolt through atmospheric interference, Nari said, gesturing at the exam materials. I can coordinate 12 different attack groups while under enemy fire. But I cannot tell you what some ancient alien poet meant when he wrote about trees. Hyun nodded sympathetically. He was facing the same challenges. All the former child soldiers were. Tae gave up yesterday. He said he would rather fight another war than try to understand galactic literature. Maybe he has the right idea. Nari picked up a different section of the exam. Mathematics problems filled the page, but not the kind she knew. These asked about theoretical concepts with no practical application. Look at this one. If a starship travels at 0.7 light speed for 18 days, how much time dilation occurs relative to observers on a planetary surface? That is easy, Hyun said, scanning the problem. The answer is about 4 hours. Yes, I know the answer too, but they want me to show the work using something called the Lorentz transformation. I learned time dilation by watching ships jump to hyperspace. They learned it from books. A voice from the doorway made them both turn. That is exactly the problem we face. President Kang entered the room with his usual confident stride. The leader of Earth's reformed government was a tall man who spoke with authority earned through years of wartime leadership. Behind him walked Counselor Yoon, a woman whose job was helping former soldiers adjust to peaceful life. Sir, Nari started to stand, but President Kang waved her back down. No formality needed. We are here to discuss your future. He pulled out a chair and sat down. The Galactic Council has made their decision about human admission to advanced educational programs. And? Hyun asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would not be good. They are concerned about our unconventional background. Director Sewell of the Galactic Education Consortium believes that warrior species do not adapt well to academic environments. They worry we might solve problems through violence instead of scholarly debate. Nari felt anger building in her chest, the same dismissive attitude that had cost the Vorthak their empire. They think we are too stupid to learn. Not stupid, Counselor Yoon said gently. But they question whether someone trained for war can transition to purely intellectual pursuits. They have never encountered child soldiers who survived and thrived. What they fail to understand, President Kang continued, is that your military training gave you educational advantages they cannot measure with standard tests. You learn by doing. You solve problems creatively. You adapt faster than any civilian population we have ever studied. Then why are we failing these entrance exams? Hyun asked. Because the tests measure the wrong things. They test memorization of facts instead of problem-solving ability. They test familiarity with galactic culture instead of intelligence. They are designed for students who spent their childhood in classrooms, not battlefields. Counselor Yoon leaned forward. We have been studying the other former child soldiers. Tae can organize supply lines for 10,000 people but cannot write a proper essay. Jin can hack any computer system in known space, but fails basic programming classes, because they teach theory before practice. Bin can build fusion reactors from scrap metal but cannot pass introductory physics because he never learned the formal equations. So what do we do? Nari asked. Give up on education? Never. President Kang's voice was firm. We fight this battle the same way we fought the Vorthak. We prove them wrong. Over the next 3 days, President Kang arranged something unprecedented. The Galactic Academy agreed to give 5 former child soldiers a practical demonstration instead of written exams. If they could prove their intellectual abilities through hands-on challenges, they would be admitted despite their test scores. Nari found herself in a laboratory filled with broken alien technology. The challenge was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Fix the malfunctioning gravity generator using only basic tools and theoretical knowledge from provided textbooks. The other test subjects were civilian students from across the galaxy. They immediately went to the textbooks, reading carefully about gravitational field theory and quantum mechanics. They made notes and discussed proper procedures. Nari walked straight to the machine and began taking it apart. Wait, called out one of the alien students, a tall blue creature with multiple eyes. Should you not study the theoretical framework first? I am studying, Nari replied, examining a damaged component. But I learn by seeing, not reading. The supervising professors watched with obvious disapproval as Nari ignored their carefully prepared study materials. Dr. Velthok, a renowned physicist from the Centauri system, whispered to his colleague that this proved humans were indeed too primitive for advanced education. 2 hours into the exam, the civilian students were still reading. They had filled pages with notes and equations, but had not touched the actual machine. Nari had the gravity generator completely disassembled and was rebuilding it with modifications of her own design. This component is installed backwards, she explained to anyone who would listen. And this power coupling is the wrong type for this model. No wonder it stopped working. Dr. Velthok approached her workstation. Young human, you cannot simply ignore established procedures. Gravity manipulation requires precise theoretical understanding. I understand it fine, Nari said, not looking up from her work. Gravity is just another force. You can measure it, redirect it, and control it like any other energy source. The theory is just someone else's way of explaining what I can see for myself. Preposterous. Without mathematical foundation, you are just guessing. Nari activated her rebuilt machine. Perfect artificial gravity filled the test chamber, stable and evenly distributed. The civilian students were still reading their textbooks. The professors stared in stunned silence as diagnostic readings showed her solution was not only functional, but more efficient than the original design. She had improved upon technology that had taken the brightest minds in the galaxy decades to develop. How? Dr. Velthok whispered. Same way I learned everything else, Nari replied. By fixing things that were broken until I understood how they worked. Word of the demonstration spread quickly through the Galactic Academy. Human students who could not pass written exams were solving problems that stumped graduate researchers. Their unconventional approaches challenged assumptions about intelligence and education that had stood for centuries. But not everyone was impressed. Director Sewell issued a statement declaring the demonstrations irrelevant to real academic study. Other species protested that humans were being given unfair advantages. Some called for restrictions on human admission to prevent contamination of traditional scholarly methods. Standing in her new dormitory room that evening, Nari looked out at the massive campus where she would spend the next 4 years. Thousands of alien students walked between buildings designed for minds very different from hers. She felt as alone as she had in the resistance camps, surrounded by people who did not understand her. The war against the Vorthak had been simple. The enemy was clearly defined and the objective was obvious. This new battle would be much harder. She was fighting not just for her own education, but for humanity's right to learn in their own way. Tomorrow, classes would begin. Her real education was just starting. The lecture hall at Galactic Academy held 300 students from 40 different worlds. Nari Kim sat in the back row, trying to make sense of Professor Raventhal's lesson on interspecies diplomatic theory. The tall Altarian spoke in flowing sentences filled with references she did not understand. As the great philosopher Zeth Moran wrote in The Third Age of Enlightenment, Professor Raventhal said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "True, civilization requires the abandonment of primitive survival instincts in favor of reasoned discourse." Nari raised her hand. Several alien students turned to stare at her with obvious curiosity. Humans were still rare enough on campus to draw attention. "Yes, Miss Kim? What happens when reasoned discourse fails? When one side refuses to negotiate?" Professor Raventhal's expression grew cold. "A truly civilized species finds peaceful solutions to all conflicts. Violence is the refuge of intellectually inferior beings. But what if the other side attacks first? What if they are trying to destroy your people? Then you have failed to communicate effectively. Every conflict can be resolved through proper dialogue and mutual understanding." Nari felt heat rising in her cheeks. She thought of her parents, killed in the first Vorthak bombardment. Of the millions of humans who died while the galaxy's civilized species debated proper diplomatic responses. Tell that to the families who were murdered while everyone else talked about communication. The lecture hall fell silent. Professor Raventhal straightened to his full height, towering over the seated students. "Miss Kim, your background is understandable, but this is an institution of higher learning, not a military base. We deal in ideas here, not crude emotion." After class, Nari walked across campus feeling more isolated than ever. Other students gave her a wide path, some looking fearful, others disgusted. She was the violent human, the child soldier who solved problems with weapons instead of words. "Hey, wait up." She turned to see a young human man jogging to catch up with her. He was tall and thin with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Unlike her, he looked comfortable in the academic environment. "I am Jae-min," he said, slightly out of breath. "I wanted to say you made good points in there. Raventhal is brilliant, but he has never faced real danger. Easy to talk about peaceful solutions when you have never been attacked." "You are human," Nari said, surprised to meet another of her species on campus, born and raised on Earth. "My family was in the deep shelters during the war. We were lucky." His expression grew serious. "I know who you are. Everyone does. You are the ghost leader, the one who saved us all." Nari felt uncomfortable with the recognition. "That was a long time ago. 3 years. And now you are here trying to learn like the rest of us." Jade gestured toward the massive library building ahead of them. "Want to study together? I am good with the theoretical stuff, but I could learn from your practical experience." Over the next few weeks, their study group grew. Rien Nam joined them, another former child soldier struggling with the transition to academic life. She had been a communication specialist during the war, able to crack any code or hack any system. Now she failed basic computer science classes because the professors insisted on teaching theory before application. Gil Park came next, a quiet young man whose parents had died in the invasion. He had grown up in refugee camps, learning engineering by fixing broken equipment with whatever materials he could find. The academy's professors told him his methods were wrong, even when they worked perfectly. "This is ridiculous," Rin said one evening as they sat in the library. She was staring at a computer programming assignment with obvious frustration. "They want me to write code that follows their style guidelines instead of code that actually works efficiently." "Form over function," Jay agreed. "They care more about doing things the proper way than doing them the right way." Nari looked around. Their study group. Each of them was brilliant in their own way, but the Academy's testing methods made them seem like failures. "We need to change how we approach this." "What do you mean?" "We have been trying to learn their way, fighting on their battlefield using their rules. That never works." Gil looked up from his engineering textbook. "You want to fight the Academy?" "Not fight. Adapt. We learn to survive by using our enemies' expectations against them. The Vorthak thought human children were weak and helpless. That mistake cost them an empire. So what are the professor's expectations?" Rin asked. "That we will fail because we are too violent and primitive to understand civilized learning." They expect us to give up or lash out in frustration. Jay was starting to understand. But what if we prove them wrong? What if we succeed by being ourselves instead of trying to copy their methods? Exactly. Nari pulled out a piece of paper and started drawing diagrams. We form our own learning network, share information horizontally instead of waiting for it to be handed down from professors, cover each other's weaknesses and amplify each other's strengths. Like a military unit, Gil said with growing excitement. Like a family, they started, meeting every evening in an unused classroom. Nari taught tactical thinking and problem solving. Rin showed them advanced computer techniques that went far beyond the basic courses. Gil demonstrated practical engineering that worked better than textbook theory. Jay helped them all navigate the cultural references and historical knowledge that filled their assignments. Word spread quickly through the small human student population. Soon their study group included 24 former soldiers and war refugees. They approached every class like a mission, gathering intelligence and developing strategies to overcome each challenge. Professor Morlex noticed the change first. The Rigelian mathematician had expected his human students to drop out within a few weeks. Instead, they were not only passing his courses, but asking questions that challenged his assumptions about mathematical applications. "Miss Kim," he said, after one particularly engaging class discussion, "your approach to quantum probability calculations is highly unorthodox." "But does it work?" Nari asked. "Well, yes, but the methodology." "Then why does the methodology matter more than the results?" Professor Morlex had no good answer for that question. As the semester progressed, the human students' reputation began to change. Instead of being seen as violent primitives, they became known as innovative problem solvers. Other species started asking to join their study groups. The collaborative learning methods that had kept them alive during the war were revolutionizing how education worked at the academy. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Vice Chancellor Threndock called an emergency meeting of the Faculty Council. The ancient Vegan administrator had run the academy for over 2 centuries and did not appreciate having his methods questioned by a group of former child soldiers. "These humans are disrupting our established educational framework," he announced to the assembled professors. "They show no respect for traditional academic hierarchy. They collaborate when they should compete. They question authority when they should accept wisdom. Their test scores are improving dramatically," Professor Morlex pointed out. "Perhaps we could learn from their methods." "Preposterous. We have maintained academic excellence for millennia. We will not lower our standards to accommodate one primitive species." Dr. Sullivan, the Academy's chief psychologist, nodded in agreement. "I have been monitoring the human students closely. They display concerning pack behavior patterns. Their loyalty to each other supersedes respect for institutional authority." "Then we must take action," Vice Chancellor Threndock declared. "Before, their influence spreads further and contaminates our entire educational system." 2 days later, new regulations appeared in the student handbook. Group study sessions were limited to 4 participants. Collaborative assignments were forbidden. Students were required to work independently and seek help only from approved faculty advisors. When Nari read the new rules, she smiled grimly. She had seen this pattern before. When conventional methods failed to stop human progress, their enemies always resorted to changing the rules. The academy administrators thought they could control human learning by limiting human cooperation. They were about to discover how wrong they were. "Time to take this to the next level," she told her study group that evening. "They want to fight us, let's give them a war." The new academy regulations took effect on a cold Monday morning. Security guards patrolled the corridors, breaking up any group of more than 3 students. Study rooms were monitored by surveillance cameras. Even casual conversations between humans drew suspicious looks from faculty members. Nari Kim sat alone in the library, officially following the new rules. But her fingers moved in subtle hand signals beneath the table, communicating with Rin Nam, 3 rows away. The silent language they had developed during the war worked perfectly in the quiet academic environment. "Temporal Studies assignment posted," Rin signed. "Professor Velthok expects failure rate of 70%. Nari nodded slightly and passed the information to Gil Park, who was sitting near the philosophy section. Within minutes, every human student in the library knew about the challenging new assignment and had begun coordinating their response. The Academy administrators had made a fundamental error. They assumed that limiting human cooperation would weaken human performance. Instead, it had forced the former child soldiers to become more creative and efficient in their communication methods. "Miss Kim, please see me after class," Professor Raventhal announced at the end of his diplomatic theory lecture. His tone suggested trouble ahead. Nari waited until the other students had filed out before approaching his desk. The tall Altarian regarded her with obvious suspicion. "Your recent test scores have improved remarkably," he said, almost as if someone has been helping you understand the material. "I have been studying harder." "Alone, as required by the new regulations?" "Yes, sir." Professor Raventhal pulled out a data pad and showed her surveillance footage from the library. "This shows you making hand gestures toward other human students. Care to explain?" Nari looked at the footage with innocent eyes. "I was stretching my fingers. Sitting for long periods makes them stiff. Those gestures appear to follow a pattern. Maybe I stretch the same way each time. Is that against the rules?" The professor's expression grew more frustrated. He clearly suspected she was lying but could not prove anything. The hand signals were too subtle and too unfamiliar for him to recognize as communication. "You humans think you are clever," he said finally. "But we know what you are doing. We will find evidence of your rule breaking eventually. I am just trying to learn, sir, same as any other student." That evening, Nari met with her core group in the most unlikely location possible. The Academy's meditation garden was designed for quiet reflection, with individual alcoves that discouraged conversation. It was the last place anyone would look for a conspiracy. Jay was already waiting when she arrived, sitting in the lotus position with his eyes closed like a devoted student seeking inner peace. Rin and Gil appeared shortly after, each taking separate alcoves as if they barely knew each other. "Status report," Nari whispered, her voice barely audible above the artificial wind chimes. "They are watching us constantly," Rin replied without opening her eyes. "But I have been monitoring their monitoring systems. They are looking for the wrong patterns." "Meaning?" "They expect us to behave like other species. Pass notes, use electronic communications, meet in secret locations. They do not understand how we actually operated during the war." Gil nodded from his alcove. "I have been spreading the new study materials through the ventilation system maintenance schedules. Every time I clean a vent, I leave data chips for the other students to find." Jay smiled serenely, maintaining his meditation pose. "Professor Solvan assigned me to write a paper on human psychological development. She thinks studying my own species will help her understand how to control us better." "Perfect. What did you tell her?" "Everything she wanted to hear. That we are pack animals driven by survival instincts. That we cannot function without group support. That isolation will break our spirits and force us to accept traditional methods." Nari felt a familiar surge of tactical excitement. The enemy was revealing their strategy while believing they were gaining intelligence. "Are they planning something bigger?" "Chancellor Threndock is meeting with the Galactic Education Board next week," Rin reported. "I intercepted communications suggesting they want to restrict human enrollment across all member institutions. They are scared," Gil observed. "Our success is making other species question their own methods." This was bigger than just their academy experience. If the galactic educational establishment decided humans were a threat to academic tradition, it could close off advanced learning opportunities for their entire species. Time for a demonstration, Nari decided. Something that proves human methods work better than theirs. "What kind of demonstration?" Jay asked. "The Kelrathi paradox." The other three stared at her in shock. The Kelrathi paradox was a legendary, mathematical problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for over 3 centuries. Graduate students studied it as an example of unsolvable complexity. Full professors built careers just by making incremental progress toward understanding its basic components. "Nari," Rin said carefully, "that problem has defeated thousands of scholars. Some of them worked on it their entire lives. Which is exactly why solving it will prove our point. They approach it like every other academic problem. They read what previous scholars wrote, build on established theories, and follow traditional mathematical frameworks. And we approach it differently. How?" by ignoring what everyone thinks they know and looking at the problem with fresh eyes. The same way, we looked at Vorthak battle tactics. Over the next week, Nari threw herself into studying the Kilrathi paradox with the same intensity she had once applied to planning military operations. But instead of reading scholarly papers about the problem, she went directly to the source material. Instead of following established mathematical approaches, she applied the practical problem-solving methods that had kept her alive during the war. The paradox involved a theoretical scenario where faster-than-light communication should be possible, but mathematical models proved it was impossible. Generations of scholars had tried to resolve the contradiction by making the math more complex. Nari tried making it simpler. What if the math is wrong? She asked her study group during their next meditation garden meeting. Wrong how? Gil asked. What if the underlying assumptions are flawed? We spent years fighting an enemy that everyone said was unbeatable. But we won because we questioned assumptions that everyone else accepted as truth. She had been working on the problem for 6 days when the breakthrough came. Not through complex equations or theoretical frameworks, but through a simple realization that the paradox was based on a false premise about how information traveled through space. The problem assumes that information and matter follow the same rules, she explained to her friends. But what if they do not? What if consciousness itself can move faster than light because it is not limited by physical constraints? Jay leaned forward with growing excitement. You mean quantum consciousness theory? But that has been discredited for centuries. By people who never tried to make it work practically. They just did theoretical math and gave up when it got complicated. Rin was already running calculations on her hidden data pad. If you are right about the consciousness component, then faster-than-light communication should be possible through quantum entanglement of neural patterns. Not should be. Is. Nari pulled out a small device she had been building in secret. I have been testing it for 3 days. The device looked like nothing more than a simple metal box with a few blinking lights. But when Nari activated it and asked Gil to think of a specific number, the display immediately showed his choice. Impossible, Jay whispered. Improbable, Nari corrected. But not impossible. The galaxy's scholars could not solve the paradox because they were approaching it from the wrong direction. They were trying to make the math fit their assumptions instead of questioning whether their assumptions were wrong. Word of Nari's breakthrough spread through the Academy's underground network, faster than official communications could travel. Human students whispered about it in corridors. Sympathetic alien professors quietly requested demonstrations. When Chancellor Threndok learned that a first-year human student claimed to have solved the Kilrathi paradox, his reaction was predictable. Preposterous. Have her expelled immediately. But Professor Morlex had seen Nari's preliminary work and recognized its potential. Perhaps we should allow her to present her findings formally. If she is wrong, public failure will discredit human methods permanently. And if she is right? Vice-Chancellor Sulvan asked. Then we have witnessed something unprecedented in galactic academic history. Chancellor Threndok considered this for a long moment. Either way, he would get what he wanted, human humiliation or human elimination. Very well. Schedule a formal thesis defense before the full academic council. Let us see what the child soldier thinks she has discovered. 3 days later, representatives from across the galaxy gathered to witness what many expected would be spectacular failure. The auditorium was packed with professors, researchers, and advanced students, all eager to see human arrogance properly humbled. Nari walked onto the stage feeling more nervous than she had ever felt facing enemy weapons. This was a different kind of battle fought with ideas instead of plasma bolts, but the stakes were just as high. The grand auditorium of Galactic Academy had never been so full. Representatives from 40 different worlds filled every seat, while millions more watched through live broadcast feeds across known space. At the center of it all, 18-year-old Nari Kim stood at a simple podium, facing the most distinguished academic minds in the galaxy. Chancellor Threndok sat in the front row wearing an expression of barely concealed contempt. Beside him, Master Scholar Velthar adjusted his ceremonial robes and prepared to demolish another naive human theory. The betting pools on major worlds gave Nari less than a 5% chance of success. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Dr. Kethmoran, the session moderator, we are here to examine Miss Kim's claimed solution to the Kilrathi paradox. This mathematical problem has challenged our greatest minds for over 300 years. Miss Kim, you may begin. Nari looked out at the sea of alien faces, most watching her with skeptical amusement. In the back rows, she spotted familiar figures. Yun Li had traveled from Earth to witness her presentation. Tae Park sat with several other former child soldiers, all wearing their military decorations with quiet pride. Even Admiral Sato was present, representing the Earth Defense Fleet. Honored scholars, Nari began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want to tell you about a mistake that cost the Vorthak Empire their war against humanity. A murmur of confusion ran through the audience. This was supposed to be a mathematical presentation, not a military history lesson. The Vorthak assumed that human children were weak and helpless because that is how children of their species behave under stress. They could not imagine that humans might be different. This assumption blinded them to our actual capabilities until it was too late. Master Scholar Velthar leaned forward with obvious irritation. Miss Kim, we are here to discuss advanced mathematics, not your war stories. But that is exactly my point, honored scholar. For 3 centuries, galactic mathematicians have tried to solve the Kelrathi paradox by assuming that consciousness follows the same rules as physical matter. What if that assumption is wrong? She activated the holographic display behind her. Instead of showing complex equations, the image depicted a simple diagram of 2 connected points. The paradox states that faster-than-light communication is impossible because information cannot travel faster than photons. But consciousness is not information in the traditional sense. It is pattern recognition, decision-making, and awareness existing in quantum states that transcend physical limitations. Professor Raventhal stood up from his seat. Pure speculation. There is no empirical evidence that consciousness operates outside known physical laws. Actually, there is. Nari gestured toward the back of the auditorium where Gil Park was sitting. Gil, please think of a 7-digit number. Do not announce it. Gil concentrated for a moment, then nodded. Nari looked at a small device in her hand. 47928816. Gil's jaw dropped. That is exactly right. The auditorium erupted in surprised chatter. Several professors demanded to examine Nari's device, while others insisted the demonstration was some kind of trick. How is this possible? Dr. Kethmoran asked. Quantum entanglement of neural patterns, Nari explained. Consciousness creates quantum states that can be synchronized across any distance instantly. The mathematics work perfectly once you stop assuming that minds follow the same rules as machines. She spent the next hour walking through her calculations. Instead of the impossibly complex equations that previous scholars had developed, her solution was elegant and straightforward. By treating consciousness as a quantum phenomenon rather than a physical process, the paradox simply disappeared. Master Scholar Velthar examined every step of her work, clearly hoping to find errors that would discredit her theory. Instead, he found mathematical beauty that took his breath away. The quantum consciousness model, he admitted reluctantly, is internally consistent and experimentally verifiable. But how did a first-year student accomplish what our greatest theorist could not? Because I am not a traditional student, Nari replied. I learned to think by solving life and death problems under extreme pressure. When everyone else sees impossible complexity, I see patterns that need to be simplified. Chancellor Threndock rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. Even if your solution is correct, it proves nothing about human educational methods. One lucky insight does not justify abandoning centuries of proven academic tradition. You are right, Nari said, surprising everyone. One solution proves nothing, but this is not just one solution. She activated a new display showing dozens of research projects. My fellow human students have been applying practical problem-solving methods to other long-standing academic challenges. Rin Nam has developed faster quantum computing algorithms. Jae Min has created new models for interspecies communication. Gil Park has designed fusion reactors that are safer and more efficient than current technology. The list went on. Improved medical treatments, revolutionary engineering techniques, breakthrough discoveries in physics and chemistry, all developed by former child soldiers and war refugees who approached problems differently than traditional scholars. We do not want to replace your educational systems, Nari continued. We want to expand them, show that there are many ways, To understand the universe, not just the methods you have always used. Professor Dana Oke, the only human faculty member, stood up from her seat. The Academy has a choice to make. We can continue pretending that only traditional approaches have value, or we can learn from students who see things differently. And what do you propose? Asked Dr. Keth Moran. Integration, not elimination. Let human students learn in ways that work for them while still meeting academic standards. Create space for different approaches to produce the same high-quality results. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Traditional professors argued that academic standards must be maintained. Progressive faculty pointed out that Nari's breakthrough proved the value of alternative methods. Students from various species called for more flexibility in educational approaches. Finally, Chancellor Threndock called for a formal vote. The question was simple. Should the Academy modify its policies to accommodate alternative learning methods, or should it maintain traditional standards regardless of results? The vote was closer than anyone expected. 47 in favor of change, 41 opposed, with 12 abstentions. By the narrowest possible margin, the Galaxy Academic Council voted to begin educational reform. This decision will be reviewed annually, Chancellor Threndock announced with obvious displeasure. Any decline in academic quality will result in immediate reversal of these policies. But Nari knew they had won something more important than a policy change. They had proven that human ways of thinking had value, that different did not mean inferior, and that the galaxy was big enough for multiple approaches to learning and discovery. 6 months later, Dr. Nari Kim stood before her first class of mixed-species students at the newly established Human Alternative Learning Institute. The classroom looked nothing like traditional lecture halls. Students worked in small groups on practical problems. Theory and application were taught together. Mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures. "Welcome to applied problem solving," she announced to the diverse group of eager faces. "In this class you will learn to question assumptions, think creatively, and solve problems that others consider impossible." An alien student raised her hand. "Professor Kim, what if we cannot understand the material using traditional study methods?" Nari smiled, remembering her own struggles with galactic entrance exams. "Then we will find methods that work for you. There are as many ways to learn as there are minds to learn with." She looked around the classroom at students from dozens of different worlds, all united by curiosity and determination to understand the universe in their own ways. Some had come from war zones like herself, others from peaceful worlds where traditional methods had failed them. All were here because they believed that intelligence came in many forms. "The most important lesson I can teach you," Nari continued, "is that being different is not a weakness to overcome. It is a strength to celebrate. The galaxy is full of unsolved problems waiting for minds that think in new ways." As her students began working on their first assignment, Nari felt a deep satisfaction that she had never experienced during the war. She was still fighting for humanity's future, but now the battles were fought with ideas instead of weapons. The victories were measured in understanding, rather than territory conquered. The girl who had once fought a war as a child had grown into a woman who battled for the right to learn and teach in her own way. And in doing so, she had opened doors for countless others who would follow. The war was over. The real work of building a better galaxy had just begun.